Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a very nice lead-in to our next speaker, Mr. Roger Circle, President of Sport Wings Incorporated, Lafayette, Indiana, will talk to us on hang gliding, a new adventure.
Thank you. Thank you. During the next 20 minutes or so, I would like to expand a little more on John's presentation on hang gliding or sky sailing or sky surfing, and it goes by a number of other names. Hang gliding, although probably the most suicidal sounding name, is currently most popular, I suspect. If you've been to Colorado or Southern California during the past 2 years or so, chances are you probably do not need an introduction to hang gliding. But I'm going to assume, for the sake of my own presentation, that most of you have not seen it, or if you have, you've probably seen it recently on perhaps one of several special television productions, or more than likely in an increasing number of television commercials where a hang glider is being used as a prop to sell the product. Those who claim to have knowledge of such things have labeled hang gliding as the fastest growing sport in America. And there are some pretty good reasons for its popularity. Among them, recreationally speaking, hang gliding packs more thrill, more liberation, more satisfaction than any other sport, land or air. Now, admittedly, I'm biased. I fly a hang glider, and John flies a hang glider. John is one of the more accomplished flyers in the Midwest, and I suspect that he'd probably say the same thing. And most anybody else that flies a hang glider, if they had any doubts before they began, have their doubts pretty much erased by the time they've made their first few flights. Practically speaking, it's cheap, and it's easy to learn, and almost anyone can do it. You don't need a license, a crew, or a big bank account. You don't need to be an athlete or a mechanical genius. Now, back off the athlete part just a little bit. For us in the Midwest, our hills are kind of short, and usually the only way to get to the top is to walk. For most of us, it's kind of hard to get to the top of the hill when you have to walk anyway, but carrying a 32-pound craft over your shoulders and going to the top of the hill adds a little bit to that exertion. But once you get to the top, it's a snap. So if you can figure out some way to cheat to get to the top, it makes it a little easier. In the West and in Colorado, fortunately, their hills are so high that they've got roads that go all the way to the top of them. And, I would like to get some of them into the Midwest to do some of their hang gliding and let them have to face some of the things we have to face with. The real reasons for hang gliding's popularity are probably not as materialistic as the reasons I've just given you. When you stand at the top of the hill and you run down that hill, and you're going like gangbusters, and your feet are stomping on the ground, and you're kicking up a lot of dust. But you're not running very far. Say 6 or 8 feet, 3 or 4 good, quick steps, and you get to the edge of the hill or the edge of the sheer drop, and you just kind of float out into the sky. That's the real thrill. When the hang glider flyer is over the edge, a contest begins. It's a contest between the pilot and the forces of nature, namely the wind and even more than that, gravity. The accomplished hang glider flyer will search out updrafts that are created by the wind blowing against the hillside that he just jumped off of. The winds are deflected skyward. And if he finds that updraft, he can be lifted, or he will climb to heights hundreds of feet above the point where he took off. And as long as that hang glider flyer is sufficiently skilled and sufficiently accomplished, he will try to stay in those updrafts. He'll learn to read the terrain, and he'll know the winds, and he'll understand where to go to find the strongest lifts, and stay up for as long as he desires. Usually there aren't any filling stations up there, and sometimes they have to come down to make a particular stop of some kind. There's no glove box to store your lunch in or anything like that. But as long as the wind holds up, as long as the pilot is sufficiently skilled, he can stay up for surprisingly long periods of time. The feeling is very difficult to describe. It is not like anything you've ever felt before, and it is probably one of the more unique things that relate directly to hang gliding and not really to any other sport. It's not like skiing because the exertion of actually doing the flying is considerably less than that of skiing. Your speed is considerably slower, and most important, you're not on the ground. It's not like flying a conventional sailplane or a conventional aircraft because by comparison now you're much closer to the ground and you relate much more closely to the ground. Unlike a powered aircraft, there's no noise, there's no vibration. Unlike a conventional sailplane, the only thing between you, the flyer, and the ground are your toes if you're flying seated. And if you're flying in a prone harness, which allows you to lay down and fly a la Superman, your nose, if it's long enough. And that's about it. One of the most incredible sensations about hang gliding is the quiet. The only sounds that you hear are the occasional buffeting of the sail, the wind whistling through the wires and some of the fittings on the glider itself. And as you fly over the beaches and you see a friend of yours 100, 200 feet down, you can actually yell down at him, and he can yell back up and take your order for lunch or whatever you want. But hang gliding is primarily a visual thing, and that's hard to describe with words, so in a few minutes I'd like to show you a short film that will probably give you a little better idea of what hang gliding is all about. But first I want to go back just a few years into the late 1900s where hang gliding probably really got its serious beginning. I suppose that that was the time when more people were thinking seriously and actually doing something about getting into the air. There were people, men like Montgomery and Chanute and the Wrights and others that built their hang gliders out of wood and muslin and were flying off half a dozen sites in various parts of the country. Most people considered these men crazy, and who's to blame them? Because after all, if man were meant to fly, God would have given him wings. Eventually, Wilbur and Orville put an engine on their hang glider, and to make a long story short, we finally made it to the moon. I'll back up a year or two from that time and go to 1951 or so, when a brilliant man named Dr. Francis Rogallo, a scientist working for the agency that was later to become known as NASA, and his wife, Gertrude, spent some time in their living room making paper models, paper kites, and Gertrude working on the sewing machine, sewing sails of different configurations, pretty feverishly to develop what ultimately became known as the Rogallo wing. It's a diamond-shaped, triangular or diamond-shaped device that was completely flexible, supported by a few simple main spars, and was able to fly regardless of its size, scaled down to any version, and regardless of the wind speeds, the same way every time. And the information was presented to NASA, and they spent a mild amount of interest on that wing. Was considered to have some potential for the return of space capsules back to Earth under complete control of the astronaut, and they could avoid splashing down in the ocean and land at an airport. And it wasn't until after Sputnik 1 was launched that the guys down at NASA decided we better get on the stick, and they spent about $100 million in the development of the Rogallo wing. Now, I'm not real sure exactly why it was never developed or never utilized. $100 million, it's a pretty good chunk of dough for something that I've never seen until 3 or 4 years ago. And the people at NASA had nothing to do with the commercialization or the modernization, the adaptation of the Rogallo wing design for use in hang gliding. But I suppose anybody that's going to spend $100 million on a project is going to have a great deal of difficulty keeping it secret. And in the late 60s, the information leaked out. Some very daring individuals in the Southern California area adapted that wing design and built some of the first Rogallo gliders out of a bamboo, binder twine, plastic, and anything else they could get their hands on, and started launching from the cliffs along the Pacific shore and landing on the beaches. Just like the individuals that I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm sure that many of the people on those beaches looked at these pioneers as being pretty crazy themselves. But this was only a few short years ago. And since the late 60s and into 1970, the sport has shown some really remarkable growth. I think I'll stop now and I'll pick up again for a few more minutes after this film. But as I mentioned before, it is a visual thing, and I can think of no better way for you to get a more complete understanding of what it's all about than to see this film. Are we ready to roll? The movie is about 2 years old, and some of the records have been eclipsed, needless to say. They mentioned the record time aloft has increased now to an excess of 13 hours in a Regalo glider. The distance covered on a single flight is in excess of 35 miles. The altitude record was set just last winter by a gentleman that made a launch from the underneath of a hot air balloon at an altitude just below 18,000 feet. And I understand there is a mountain in South Africa that's about 19,000 feet. And there are some enthusiasts that are taking a long, hard look at it. The Southern California Hang Gliding Association, which began in 1971 or thereabouts, it started with about 25 of the enthusiasts that made their first gliders with bamboo and plastic and binder twine and so forth, and has grown very, very quickly. In 1972, the membership of the Southern California Hang Glider Association expanded to about 500, from 25 to 500. In 1973, it expanded to over 5,000. It's in the fall. And subsequently changed their corporate name and became the United States Hang Gliding Association. In 1974, in the fall, a year later, there were in excess of 12,000 members of this one organization. And today there are, at that time, there were estimated to be perhaps as many as about 50,000 people flying hang gliders in the United States. This summer will probably show as a remarkable a growth rate as any other season, both the rate of growth and the new people for the first time trying hang gliding, as educational procedures have taken a more professional and mature approach. Some of the procedures are a little questionable that they use in the film, and at least around here it's not quite like that. People can make a surprisingly quick and safe entry into hang gliding with the proper instruction. The sport itself is becoming quite a spectator sport. And back off to Chattanooga, Tennessee at a recent meet, we watched about 100 flyers and several thousand spectators that had gathered at a place called Crystal Caverns that had not seen that many people since they started putting Sea Rock City on birdhouses. As we left, and we had to leave a little bit early because we had production schedules to meet, there were thousands of people on top of cars watching the meet with binoculars and everything else. And we saw a bumper sticker on a van on the way out, which probably summed up the attitudes of many, many flyers towards hang gliding. The bumper sticker said, if man were meant to stay on the ground, God would have given him roots. So, thank you very much.